On this episode, we have Zach Buchanan, Diamondbacks beat writer for The Athletic. Zach, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be on.
All right, so before we get into the potential baseball in May discussion, first I want to hear about how you started your career. Was a baseball writer always a dream of yours from the beginning?
Not baseball specifically. I wanted to be a sports writer since my senior year of high school. I probably couldn't really articulate why, except that I liked writing and I liked sports, and I figured, okay, might as well put those together. But I really didn't have an idea for what went into being a sports writer. But I went to journalism school at Northwestern, and then wasn't a particularly good student, but I wrote for the school newspaper for like a year, had some decent internships. But to start my career, I really kind of had to start at the bottom. I started at a paper called the Longview Daily News in Longview, Washington, the town of 40,000 people, covering high school sports. Really not on many people's radar. And I just kind of worked my way up from there. I spent 2 years there, then got hired at the Arizona Republic to write high school sports for the largest newspaper in Arizona. And after a year of doing that at the Republic, they put me on the Diamondbacks as the backup. And to that point, baseball wasn't really my favorite sport. I didn't dislike baseball, but it wasn't a sport that I thought very deeply about or cared that much about. I was more of a football fan at that point. But since I've been put on baseball, I can't imagine covering a different sport. It's a little weird now with everything being shut down, but generally the access is better than any sport. You're in the clubhouse for at least an hour every day before every game. You really get to know the players. I feel like it's easier to tell a good story in baseball than other sports. So since being put on baseball, it's kind of, familiarity has bred kind of affection, and I really do like baseball now.
Yeah, I had a little taste of that in 2018. I was an intern for the broadcast department with the Minnesota Twins, so I had that option of going into the clubhouse, and the feeling of interviewing players and kind of having access that many people don't have is like such a luxury. And with what's going on now, you kind of take it for granted in a way that you have this cool freaking job to talk to the best athletes in the world. And then now we're stuck in our houses, in our homes for months at a time. We have no idea when it's going to end. But to kind of piggyback on how you started covering the Diamondbacks 2012, 2013, what made you come back after being the Cincinnati Reds beat reporter?
Well, a lot of factors. One is that The Athletic was starting up, and it was very exciting, and they were really putting on kind of the full court press to get the people they wanted, which was, if you're a sports writer, it's not very often that you have a chance to use some leverage to get a better deal for yourself, and this was one of them. But also my wife and I really liked Phoenix. I like Cincinnati a lot. I'm wearing actually a Cincy hat right now, but my wife had a little bit harder of a time kind of feeling at home there. Her family's in California.
Oh, it's relatively close.
There's no easy and direct way or cheap way to get from Cincinnati to Sacramento to visit family. It's a lot easier in Phoenix, and we always kind of felt like Phoenix was home to us, even though I'm from Texas and she's from California. But so when we had the opportunity to move back here, it made sense for me she moved to Cincinnati for me. I should move back here for her.
Well, I mean, Phoenix, Arizona, all I know, it's very hot and it's always summer 24/7. So I can't imagine that it can't be a horrible transition from Cincinnati to Phoenix. But being the beat writer for the D-backs, you're the one covering for The Athletic. I'm sure, when did it sit for you that you were the guy for Diamondbacks news, breaking news, everything, for such a prestigious I don't think it's up and coming anymore because it's so well known, but The Athletic is still very new to a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know if I view myself as the guy. Part of that might be that one of my best friends is Nick Pecoro, who covers the team for the newspaper. He's been doing it for over a decade on the Diamondbacks, and I was his backup at the Republic. So a lot of what I learned about this business, I learned from him. And he still kicks my butt left and right in terms of scoops and stuff like that. And I've over the years, even the playing field a little more than I was before. But I really started feeling like I had a mastery of what I do back in Cincinnati. That was the step where I went from being a backup to being a full-time beat writer. And I was only there 2 years, but by my second year there, I felt like, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know that I'm good at this. And it was a little stressful coming back here and having to kind of start from scratch and carve out a space for myself where on a beat where Nick has been doing it for a decade, and the MLB.com reporter Steve Gilbert has literally been covering the team since its inception.
Right.
But after about a year, I felt like, okay, I have a pretty good handle on what's expected of me, how to do my job, and now I feel like pretty confident in what I'm doing.
I feel like when it comes to kind of getting your name out there and getting that reputation as a guy that players could trust, once there's 8 or 9 other beat writers from different newspapers or different outlets, how competitive is it to get that relationship as a new guy, coming in as a new guy? And you're not a new guy now, but coming in as a new guy, how tough is that for someone maybe listening to this saying like, oh, I'm that rookie beat reporter trying to compete with the veterans?
I mean, it is tough. It's not as hard in Arizona because there are only 3 major guys on the beat. And even when I came back here, there were a lot of players I still knew from when I covered the team before. I still knew Paul Goldschmidt. I knew Nick Ahmed. I knew David Peralta. The kind of cast of characters was very similar, so it didn't take very long to kind of get back in the swing of things. But you have to realize the baseball season is so long that by the end of it, you're going to build all these relationships you didn't have before. And some of them are with guys that only just joined the team. You know, every season there are new players on the roster that you build relationships with. All 3 of us on the beat got to know Steven Souza really well, and he wasn't there until the year I came back onto the beat. And so you're going to get to know these guys. It's inevitable, especially if you're going on the road and covering a ton of road games where there's far less media there. You're going to get to know the people you're covering. If you don't get to know them, you're probably pretty bad at your job. So
Right.
It wasn't that hard. Now, I haven't been on a more cutthroat beat. Like if I were covering the Yankees, I'm sure it'd be way harder than this because Nick, Steve, and I all, we're all friends with each other. We don't want to make each other's lives difficult. So we're probably not as competitive or cutthroat as we could be. But when you have 10 or 11 outlets covering the team like you do on the Yankees and all trying to get some bit of information the other person doesn't have, I'm sure it's way more stressful.
Yeah, and you know what? The competitive, like with the Yankees as an example, it's so competitive between each beat writer or a columnist or whatever. It's kind of unsettling in a way where everyone's friendly, but I feel like deep down there is a competitive nature, almost like negatively, where like I have to get this first to beat out the New York Times or the New Yorker or Newsday or MLB.com. But I feel like maybe in the smaller markets, you kind of have that relationship in a way where you do want to be competitive, but you're also friendly at the same exact time. Has there ever been a time where you've noticed that going in an opposing clubhouse where you think it's like, ooh, this is unsettling?
I don't know about unsettling. Someone once told me that the Mets beat was like when the reporters went in the clubhouse, it's like when you put 10 cats in the same room, they all go to different corners and just don't talk to each other.
That's so
But
weird.
I think people in the Mets beat still get along with each other.
Right.
And honestly, if you don't find a way to get along with people you're traveling around with, like your life is going to be miserable.
6 months of the year, you have to talk to them,
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I want to beat Nick and Steve every time I can. But if one of them beats me on something, like I go, oh man, why didn't I get that? Or why didn't I think of that story idea? Which is what it happens to be most often, because my role is not really to break news. But if Nick has a story that's like a really good story, I'm thinking, oh, I remember he did one of last year maybe on how Miguel Montero had become an agent. And I was thinking, oh, that's a really good story. I know Miggy well enough. Why didn't I think of doing that? And I'm sure that happens with Nick with stories I write. And we each have our share of breaking news, although most of the breaking news goes to the national guys these days. But I was able to break news a couple of days ago on the lawsuit that the Diamondbacks 3 minority owners filed against the managing general partner. I had that first.
How did that feel to get that first? And that's not a normal story that comes about.
I mean,
That's huge.
It felt great. It especially felt great when, like, I got to use some skills that I have in terms of filing public records requests and knowing how to read a legal complaint and stuff like that. And at the end of it, I felt very accomplished. So like, oh, I kind of felt like a real reporter today, not just a sports reporter.
Right.
But we all want to,
Scoop
yeah,
City.
we all want to beat each other, but we don't get like up on our feelings about it. And if one of us gets beaten by the other guy, we compliment that person on their story, and we try and come up with another good story that will take the attention back.
I was just thinking this, I would say 2 seconds before I got on with you. When I was working with the Twins, Eduardo Escobar got traded over to you guys, the Diamondbacks. That guy was one of the funnier guys I've ever been, like as a reporter or intern, whatever. I've been around the New York Giants and now the Twins, and that personality is hard to take every single day, but he is so funny. He's a great guy. He's a great team player. Has there been any interviews or conversations with him that you kind of remember or you could tell us?
Sure. Escobar is great. He's an infectious personality. I did a story the beginning of last season about his upbringing in Venezuela and how he's just the most relentlessly positive person, despite the fact that like his father left when they were very young. His mother was very poor. They really had to scrape by. And he talked very openly about like how that was to deal with and how it's kind of turned him into the person he is today. And then he's such a quirky personality. I'm sure you were around him and heard about his like fear of cats. And like the Diamondbacks caught on to that and decided to really terrorize him with this little fake cat all the time. And so I did a story about how scared he is of cats, which was really fun. But he's really fun to be around. Just the way, like, I don't know if he was doing it in Minnesota, but he likes to just, whenever he sees anybody, he just goes, "Congratulations, man!" And it's just everybody like says it back to him. It's so funny. And
he always wears like the Jordan jumpsuits, or he always comes in jerseys, and he's always sporting his team. I know there was like a bet, I guess, in clubhouse bet with like a game they were watching, like one person would have to wear a jersey that they didn't want to. And he always would keep the clubhouse upbeat. Even in 2018, when the Twins, I think, won 78 games, it was a real up and down year, but he always had a moment where you could like relax, don't take it too seriously, and kind of just make the whole vibe in the clubhouse a little more positive.
Yeah, he definitely has that effect. He's whenever you hear him talking, you kind of become a little happier. Even though like sometimes he's really hard to understand, but he speaks with such enthusiasm that it's like you get kind of the spirit of it.
Right, exactly. To just go back a little bit on the Cincinnati Reds, covering them, there's a lot of players, really good players over the years that you covered them. Talk about what you can talk about, your favorite story you did covering the Reds. Because you have, I mean, I think one of my favorite players of all time is Joey Votto, and he is a wild card.
Votto is great. Votto is the most interesting person I've ever covered. And I'm grateful that I have a solid relationship with him and have kept in touch. He's just so willing to, he's such a deep thinker, and he's so willing to share his thoughts in kind of this reasoned, measured way. That every time you talk to him, you learn something, or you get some idea for a story, and he's just great to cover. I'm sure I'll never cover another guy like him. But my favorite story with the Reds was one I did on Michael Lorenzen and his background. I went and visited him. He was living in San Diego at the time over the off season, and he just has a crazy background. His dad left the family when he was like 12 because there were a couple of warrants out for his arrest. He just like fled to Nevada. And then Michael fell into like drug use and alcoholism and all as like a high schooler, and was really on the verge of just kind of falling off the map. He was always a talented athlete, but he would not have been where he is today if he hadn't gotten his act together. And he got his act together in college and really turned himself around. And then in 2016, he kind of made peace with his dad right before his dad died of complications from alcoholism. And it was a really emotional story for him. And I was really grateful that he kind of opened up about his life, but it was just kind of like an unbelievable backstory, because that year he had this big home run that he hit. It was literally the game he got back after going to his dad's funeral, and he hit this big emotional home run, and I think it was the first home run of his career, maybe. It was just such an incredible moment, and to know that there was all these layers behind it that no one had really explored, like, is what made it my favorite story. It might be my favorite story I've ever written.
Yeah, I actually remember that whole situation where his dad passed away, and he's a pitcher, and pitchers,
Mm.
as people know, pitchers don't usually hit, and he's a relief pitcher, so relief pitchers never hit, and the kid can swing a little bit. He
He might be
can.
the most athletic person I've ever met.
He's huge. One
Mhm.
can swing the stick, and he can play the outfield too. And I feel like that's so valuable with today's baseball, where Shohei Ohtani is DHing and pitching,
Yeah.
and he's now, I think, turned the leaf with players that can maybe do both. And he's a pretty good pitcher as well. And I think I think Major League Baseball is trying to get his image like out there. He's becoming more of a popular player amongst other major league players, which I think is great to see that. My last question about you as a writer is how were you approached by The Athletic, and did you hesitate to take the job at all?
I was approached like a lot of other people were at that stage. Kind of the winter I joined was the kind of the winter that they just kind of blew up. Previously they'd been in some hockey cities, and then, like, I think Cleveland and Chicago, and then they just started hiring everybody. They hired Ken Rosenthal like several months before that, and they hired my beat partner on the Reds, Trent Rosecrans, to cover the Reds in Cincinnati, and just every notable baseball writer they're picking off left and right. And I think they were just kind of going down the list and saying, these are the guys we want. Let's see what it takes to get them. And then they got to my name. I had been talking with them for like a month or so, just back and forth about, hey, what city would you maybe want to cover? I'm from Dallas, so they were raising that possibility of me being the Dallas guy, and then Phoenix, knowing my history there. Um, and we're kind of talking back and forth about what it would look like, what the company was like. I was talking to a lot of my fellow writers who were in the same situation. We're all trying to figure out, like, is this thing for real? Like, right now, The Athletic seems like this behemoth, but at the time, we're all wondering, like, is this going to work? Like, hiring all these people right off the bat, like,
Where the money come from? It's
yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah. Um, how do we get judged? What if one city's side isn't doing well? Are you guys going to close shop on it? What becomes of me, et cetera? And it actually came to fruition. Like, this is all leading up to my wedding. There hadn't been any resolution at the wedding, so it was still kind of up in the air. And then they actually finally offered me the job when I was in Argentina with my wife on our honeymoon.
wow.
And so we did the whole, the whole process is you negotiate a little bit with the Athletic, then you take it back to the Inquirer to see if the Inquirer wants to do something about it. Then you take that offer back to the Athletic. And I didn't want to play each side against each other too much. That would be disrespectful, but I wanted to make sure I was getting the best deal I could for myself. And I accepted the job while in Argentina. And yeah, there was some like trepidation. I think everybody had it when they were joining it, because they were thinking, oh, is this thing gonna last? What if this thing folds? But I think eventually it all came down to, like, we've seen what's happening at newspapers. I don't feel any less safe at the Athletic than I would at any newspaper in America. So if it's the opportunity to do some cool stuff and write the type of stuff I really want to write, not have to worry about notebooks and game stories, and it's probably worth checking out. And it's been more than the right decision.
So let's get to the wild story that's unfolded the past couple of days, is a potential having baseball back in May. And the reason I've followed you for probably over a year now, and the reason I want to interview you is because you are firsthand. You are here. You are there in Phoenix, Arizona, and the fact that Major League Baseball wants to start some sort of baseball activity, if it's like a couple weeks spring training and then leading up to maybe a start of a season, they want to do it in Arizona. What is your opinion on this? I know you tweeted it out, and there was some positive and there was a lot of negative comments about, we want baseball back, or it's not safe. But I want to get your opinion on this, because personally, I'm a huge baseball guy. I want baseball back just like you and every other big baseball fan there is. I really don't think it's safe.
I agree with you. I think it's a bad idea. I don't blame the league for kicking it around and trying to come up with a way that it could work. But I don't think this idea ain't it, you know? There's just so many ways to poke holes with it. The first is obviously safety. Like, can we guarantee that everybody involved comes to the park and is not carrying and spreading the virus? Until we have so much testing that everybody on earth can get tested, everybody in the country can get tested every day if they feel they need to, I don't see how that works. And I don't see how we get there by May. So that's issue number one. If you can't clear that threshold, I'm not sure you can clear any threshold. But even if you could, this plan would require thousands of people coming to Arizona and basically being sequestered and like prevented from going out in the wider world. The players go from the hotel to the park and back. There's, I guess, been some talk that maybe the players' families could come with them, which would maybe make that a little easier. But even then, those families, they can't go to the park with the kids. They can't go if they have small children, you're going to keep them cooped up in a hotel room the entire time. That seems like murder to me. And so what happens even if the families come, say a grandparent back home gets sick? We're still in the middle of a pandemic. Are you telling that player's wife and that player's kids, they cannot go out and help grandma or grandpa back east or something, because if they do, then they won't be able to play when they come back? I don't think many families would agree to that. And you have to keep in mind that these players are not going to be making their full salaries under this scenario because there's going to be no people in the parks. Yeah. So that's a huge source of revenue that's not coming in. The owners are not going to be like, we're not going to pay this guy $17 million when we're only making about a third of that in terms of, per player income from putting these games on just for TV. So that's a hurdle. And then you get to the fact that there's only one dome stadium here in Arizona. It can maybe host 3 games a day. But all the other spring training parks, while perfectly fine places to watch a game in March, in July are brutal places to watch a game during the day. It is so hot. People who are not from here do not understand how hot it gets here. Yeah. A couple years ago, it was so hot that planes couldn't take off on the runway for like 3 days. Like, it's really hot. So if you're trying to avoid day games, you're playing in the morning, you're playing late at night. If the Yankees are playing a 9 o'clock game here in Phoenix, it's midnight in New York. Who's going to watch that? So if the goal is to get TV revenue, how are you going to get TV revenue when you're putting these teams on at times where people in those markets probably can't watch them? So it's just too many, to make this work, you'd have to it's like walking a tightrope. If you can walk that tightrope, great. But in this situation, if you can't, people get sick. And so I think we need to come up with a plan that has a less chance of going horribly, horribly wrong if something with one or two things go wrong.
See, I was reading somewhere where the Arizona health officials were saying that they're not even at the stage where it's going to be at its worst. It's going to be worse in the middle of April till maybe the whole month of May. Yeah. And what's crazy, I wrote some notes here that there's the CDC is supporting this.
See, I think that's being taken a little far.
Because I was reading Jeff Passan's article this morning. I just wanted some quick background about it. He was saying that the CDC was supporting this, which with exactly your comment, I think that's being kind of overblown, and then they're using that just one little statement there to throw out to the public.
The CDC doesn't seem to be willing to support this on the record, which I think is a distinction. It's one thing to try and design a system that is so kind of secure that everybody going to the park, thousands of people to put on baseball games across the valley, is not carrying the virus and not spreading the virus. I mean, the thing they talk about, having the players sit in the stands several seats apart so they're socially distancing.
It just looks awkward too,
I get how you can design a system, but the question is, would players buy into this? Does it make sense for the TV side of things? I don't think it does. So I think you have to serve all these different masters, and if you can't serve all of them, it's probably not worth doing. So it's one thing to design, if all these players were automatons who didn't have families and lives and personalities, You could say like, oh yeah, this guy can go sit over here in the left field bleachers. The pitcher will go sit over behind home plate, and no one will get sick. But that sounds pretty miserable if you're a
It
baseball
sounds
player.
crazy. It
Would you
sounds
want to do that?
absolutely crazy. No, if
No.
I was a player, I would never want to do this. I saw a comment from Colorado Rockies third baseman Nolan Arenado. He's one of the many players that kind of agree with us. He said, if it's safe, I'm in. Now, we all know Arenado doesn't – he's not going to have a hard time with getting money because the guy's got a ton of it. I do think that the players that need the money the most are kind of like the 24th or 25th man on the roster.
Yeah.
Is that a situation where players will absolutely agree to it and say like, you know what, I'm in because I need the money, or they're kind of just, I don't even know what to say.
I mean, you do think those players, they need the money more. And they also are more likely to be single, not have kids yet because they're generally younger. But still, this isn't going to require the approval of the union. And so it's kind of the larger union vote that's going to be required here. So I think if the union can't guarantee that every player will feel safe enough to do this, then you're not going to see it happen.
Yeah, it's very weird. I have one more question because I know you have to go. You have to go on the radio. Some rule changes that have been implemented with this. You have the no mound visits. There could be 7-inning doubleheaders. The electronic strike zone, umpires to be 6 feet behind, which is weird. I that's a whole other discussion. I hate the electronic umpiring thing, electronic strike zones. And I saw another one. Well, I said, if they're going to be 6 feet behind, then where's the social distancing between the catcher and the batter? You're right next to them. You know, I want to hear your opinion about these rule changes and if they're absolutely ridiculous to use or not, because I absolutely hate all of them as a baseball oldie
I
purist.
think the ones that are designed to cram the most games into a short period of time are probably good ideas. If we're assuming that when baseball comes back that it is safe to play baseball, it's playing like 7-inning doubleheaders, if it means that we get 10 extra games in a month with expanded rosters, let's go for it. Let's cram as much baseball as we can into the game safely. But the stuff that's designed to prevent social distancing, like no mound visits for the catcher or the manager, that's one thing. We probably don't need those. If this hastens the advance to some other systems to get rid of some of the things that kind of drag down the pace of the game, that's fine with me. But like playing doubleheaders, if they want to get creative and do a creative playoff format, if we play like 2 months of regular season games and have like a really wild, fun playoffs, let's go for it. This season's going to be like have an asterisk by it for all time anyway, because we're not going to play 162 games. So we're not going to look at the stats the same way. We're always going to hold this season aside. So let's get funky with it. Let's do some fun stuff that we wouldn't otherwise do, knowing that it doesn't have to be like these are permanent changes, but just like, well, hey, this one's like a freebie. So let's do like a 30-team playoff over 2 months or something. Like that would be fun as hell. Like, so I'm all for getting creative and cramming as much baseball into here as we can, as long as we can do it safe.
It's gonna be weird for a baseball fan like myself to maybe get used to that, but you know what? Maybe we got to try new things to get the players and people excited. Zach, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm the reason I asked you is because you were right there in the zone where maybe baseball could be played. So I really appreciate giving your insight and about your career as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Happy to do it.
Appreciate it.